Sarah Martinez walked into the job fair at the Phoenix Convention Center with the same nervous energy that filled the air around hundreds of other job seekers. At 32, she looked younger than her years, with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing a conservative blue blazer that hung slightly loose on her small frame. She clutched a manila folder containing freshly printed resumes, her hands trembling just enough to make the papers rustle softly as she moved through the crowded hall. The massive space buzzed with conversation, the clicking of heels on polished concrete, and the occasional burst of laughter from networking groups. Rows of corporate booths stretched across the floor, each decorated with colorful banners and staffed by recruiters in sharp business attire. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. She had never attended anything like this before. "First time?" asked a friendly voice beside her. Sarah turned to see a woman about her own age, professionally dressed in a black pantsuit with perfectly styled blonde hair. Her name tag read, Jennifer Walsh, Senior Recruiter, Tech Forward Solutions. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah replied with a nervous laugh, adjusting the strap of her worn leather purse. Jennifer smiled warmly. "Don't worry about it. Everyone starts somewhere. What kind of work are you looking for?" Sarah hesitated, glancing down at her resume folder. "Administrative work, maybe data entry or customer service. Something entry-level where I can learn and grow." "Great attitude," Jennifer nodded approvingly. "Have you worked in office environments before?" "Not really," Sarah admitted, her voice growing quieter. "I've been out of the workforce for a while. I'm just looking for a fresh start." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the center of the hall. A group of protesters had somehow made it past security and were shouting about veterans' rights and healthcare funding. Their signs bobbed above the crowd as security guards moved quickly to escort them out. Most job seekers seemed annoyed by the disruption, muttering complaints about the interruption to their networking. Sarah's reaction was different. She went completely still, her eyes tracking the protesters' movements with an intensity that hadn't been there moments before. Her breathing changed, becoming more controlled and deliberate. Jennifer noticed the shift but didn't understand what she was seeing. "Hopefully they get that sorted out quickly," Jennifer said, trying to continue their conversation. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Her attention was focused on the security guards' approach patterns and exit routes. She seemed to be calculating something, her mind working through scenarios that had nothing to do with job hunting. After a few seconds, she blinked and returned her attention to Jennifer, but something had changed in her demeanor. "Sorry, what were you saying?" Sarah asked, though her voice carried a new quality of awareness. "I was just saying I hope they clear out those protesters soon so we can get back to business," Jennifer repeated, studying Sarah's face curiously. "They're veterans," Sarah said simply. "They're probably struggling with the system." "How can you tell?" Jennifer asked. Sarah paused, realizing she had revealed more insight than someone with her claimed background should possess. "Just a guess," she said carefully. As the morning progressed, Sarah made her way through the job fair with methodical precision that contrasted sharply with her earlier nervous energy. She approached each booth with increasing confidence, though she maintained her story about seeking entry-level positions. At the booth for Morrison Manufacturing, she spoke with a hiring manager named David Chen about warehouse operations roles. "We're looking for people who can handle the physical demands," David explained. "It involves heavy lifting, long hours on your feet, working in varying temperatures. Some people find it challenging." "I think I could handle it," Sarah replied evenly. David looked at her petite frame skeptically. "Have you done any physical labor before? Construction? Military service? Anything like that?" "Nothing like that," Sarah said, though something flickered in her eyes. "But I'm stronger than I look, and I learn fast." "Well, we do provide training," David conceded. "But I have to ask, what have you been doing for work recently?" Sarah had prepared for this question, but it still made her uncomfortable. I took some time off to deal with personal matters, family stuff. Now I'm ready to get back into the workforce and build a career. It was technically true, though it left out years of experiences that would have made David's concerns about physical demands seem laughable. Sarah had learned to navigate these conversations carefully, providing just enough information to seem credible while avoiding details that would lead to complicated questions. At the booth for Helping Hands Community Services, a non-profit organization, Sarah found herself drawn into conversation with the program director, Maria Santos. The organization provided support services for homeless veterans, and Maria was passionate about their mission. "We're looking for people who understand trauma and can connect with our clients," Maria explained. "Many of our veterans have been through experiences that are hard for civilians to comprehend. They need staff who can relate to their struggles without judgment." Sarah listened intently, asking questions that revealed a deeper understanding of veteran issues than she had displayed elsewhere. "What kind of trauma are you talking about specifically?" she asked. "Combat exposure, multiple deployments, injuries both physical and psychological," Maria replied. "Some of our clients have PTSD, survivor's guilt, adjustment disorders. They've seen and done things that mark you permanently." "And you think civilians can't understand that?" Sarah asked quietly. "Some can," Maria said carefully. "But there's a difference between intellectual understanding and lived experience. Veterans often feel more comfortable with other veterans because they don't have to explain certain things." Sarah nodded slowly. "That makes sense." "Have you had any experience working with at-risk populations?" Maria continued. "Not professionally," Sarah answered, which was again technically true. "But I'm interested in learning. I think everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their lives." Maria was impressed by Sarah's sincerity and gave her detailed information about their training programs. As they talked, other job seekers came and went, but Sarah remained engaged in the conversation for nearly 30 minutes. Maria found herself sharing stories about specific clients and the challenges the organization faced. "One of our biggest problems is funding," Maria confided. "Government support keeps getting cut, and private donations only go so far. Meanwhile, we're seeing more and more young veterans who did multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of these kids deployed straight out of high school and spent their entire 20s in combat zones." "How many deployments?" Sarah asked. "Some of our clients did 4, 5, even 6 tours. Can you imagine? Years of your life spent in active combat situations, then trying to come home and adjust to civilian life like nothing happened." Sarah's expression had grown more thoughtful. "What kinds of injuries do you see?" "Everything," Maria sighed. "Traumatic brain injuries from IED blasts, missing limbs, severe PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, and those are just the visible ones. The invisible wounds are often worse." "IEDs," Sarah repeated quietly. "Improvised explosive devices," Maria explained. "Roadside bombs. They were everywhere in Iraq and Afghanistan. Even if they didn't kill you, the blast could scramble your brain or tear up your body. We have clients who were injured multiple times and kept going back." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Why did they keep going back?" "Duty. Loyalty to their brothers and sisters in arms. Sense of purpose," Maria replied. "Some of them felt guilty about leaving their units. Others just knew that was the job they signed up for." Their conversation was interrupted by another recruiter calling Maria away for a scheduled meeting. As she prepared to leave, Maria handed Sarah several brochures and her business card. "I hope you'll consider applying," Maria said warmly. "I have a good feeling about you. There's something about your questions and the way you listen that tells me you might be exactly what our veterans need." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah continued making her rounds, but the conversation with Maria had affected her more than she let on. She found herself thinking about the veterans Maria described, imagining their struggles to readjust to civilian life. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was essentially doing the same thing, though from a very different starting point. At the booth for Secure Mac Security Services, she spoke with a former police officer named Tom Bradley who was recruiting for various security positions. His demeanor was professional but friendly, and he had the bearing of someone with extensive law enforcement experience. "We're looking for people who can handle themselves in difficult situations," Tom explained. "Our contracts include everything from shopping mall security to corporate executive protection. The pay varies depending on the assignment and your qualifications." "What kind of qualifications?" Sarah asked. "Military or law enforcement background is preferred but not required," Tom said. "We provide training, but prior experience with weapons, tactical situations, or emergency response is a big plus." "I don't have any of that," Sarah said, maintaining her cover story. Tom studied her for a moment. "You carry yourself like you might," he observed. "Good posture, aware of your surroundings, comfortable with eye contact. Sometimes people have skills they don't realize." Sarah felt a moment of alarm. She had been careful to project the image of an inexperienced civilian, but old habits were apparently harder to suppress than she had thought. "I just try to stay alert," she said. "Safety first, you know." "Smart approach," Tom nodded. "Tell you what, if you're interested in security work, we offer a basic training program that covers everything you need to know. No experience necessary, and we pay you while you train." "That sounds interesting," Sarah replied, though she was thinking about how awkward it would be to sit through training for skills she already possessed at an expert level. The day was winding down when Sarah found herself at one of the last booths she planned to visit. Wilson Financial Services was looking for administrative assistants and customer service representatives. The recruiter, an older man named Robert Wilson, seemed tired but maintained professional courtesy as he described the available positions. "It's basic office work," Robert explained. "Answering phones, filing, data entry, scheduling appointments. We provide full training, and there's room for advancement if you prove yourself reliable." "That sounds perfect for someone like me," Sarah said. "I'm just looking for something stable where I can learn and grow." "What's your background?" Robert asked, pulling out an application form. Sarah gave him the same story she had been telling all day about taking time off for personal matters and now wanting to start fresh. Robert listened politely while filling out preliminary information, but seemed distracted by something happening at another booth nearby. A group of people had gathered around one of the military recruitment tables, where a decorated Army sergeant was speaking to potential enlistees about military careers. The sergeant was wearing his dress uniform with numerous ribbons and medals displayed on his chest. Several young people were asking questions about different military occupational specialties and deployment schedules. "My nephew joined the Army last year," Robert mentioned, glancing toward the military booth. "He's stationed at Fort Campbell now, training for his first deployment. I worry about kids like him. They have no idea what they're getting into." Sarah followed his gaze to the uniformed sergeant. Even from a distance, she could read his ribbon rack and understood exactly what each decoration represented. The sergeant had clearly seen significant combat action, probably multiple deployments to Iraq or Afghanistan based on his age and the specific awards displayed. "Military service can be difficult," Sarah agreed carefully. "My brother served in Vietnam," Robert continued. "He came back different. Never talked much about what happened over there, but you could tell it affected him. These new wars seem just as bad, maybe worse. All these roadside bombs and guerrilla tactics." "Did your brother adjust okay when he came home?" Sarah asked. "Eventually, but it took years. He had nightmares, trouble holding jobs, problems with relationships. Back then, they didn't have programs like they do now. Veterans were pretty much on their own to figure things out." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "It's good that there's more support available now." Is there, though? Robert asked skeptically. I read news stories about veterans waiting months for healthcare appointments, committing suicide at alarming rates, struggling with homelessness. Makes me wonder if we've really learned anything. The conversation was getting uncomfortably personal for Sarah. She could feel herself being drawn into topics that hit too close to home. Topics where her real knowledge and experience might show through her carefully constructed civilian persona. I should probably get going, Sarah said, accepting Robert's business card and the application he had filled out. Thank you for your time. Of course, Robert replied. Feel free to call if you have any questions about the position. As Sarah prepared to leave the job fair, she realized how emotionally and mentally exhausting the day had been. Maintaining her cover story while suppressing years of training and experience had required constant vigilance. Every conversation had been a careful balancing act between appearing genuinely naive about things she understood intimately and showing enough competence to be considered for employment. She made one final stop at the information booth near the exit to pick up a job fair directory and schedule of upcoming career events. The volunteer working the booth was a cheerful college student named Amy, who seemed excited to help anyone who stopped by. How was your first job fair experience? Amy asked with genuine enthusiasm. Educational, Sarah replied honestly. I learned a lot about what's available out there. Did you find anything that interested you? Sarah thought about the various conversations she had throughout the day. The nonprofit work with homeless veterans had resonated with her more than she expected, though it would also be the most personally challenging. The security work would utilize her existing skills, but might raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. The administrative positions offered anonymity, but would likely be mind-numbing for someone with her background. A few possibilities, Sarah said diplomatically. I need to think about which direction makes the most sense. Well, there's another job fair next month if you want to explore more options, Amy offered, handing her a flyer. Same location, different companies. As Sarah walked toward the parking garage, she reflected on the strange position she found herself in. Here she was, someone with years of specialized training and experience in high-stakes situations, pretending to be a complete beginner in the workforce. The irony was that her real qualifications would make her overqualified for most of the positions she had discussed. But those same qualifications came with complications she wasn't ready to navigate. She thought about Maria Santos and the Homeless Veterans Program. The work would be meaningful and would allow her to use her understanding of military culture and trauma, even if she couldn't reveal the source of that understanding. But it would also mean daily exposure to stories and situations that might trigger her own unresolved issues. The security work with Tom Bradley's company offered a middle ground. She could use some of her skills without having to explain their origin, and the work would provide decent income while she figured out her longer-term plans. But she wondered how long she could maintain the pretense of learning skills she already possessed. Sarah reached her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that she had bought with cash from a used car lot 3 weeks earlier. Like everything else in her current life, it was practical, unremarkable, and designed not to draw attention. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, organizing the business cards and brochures she had collected throughout the day. Among the materials was Maria Santos's card from Helping Hands Community Services. Sarah studied it carefully, reading the mission statement printed on the back. Providing hope, support, and resources to veterans transitioning to civilian life. The word struck her as both ironic and appropriate. She was certainly a veteran transitioning to civilian life, though not in the way Maria probably imagined. As she drove home to her small apartment across town, Sarah thought about the protesters who had briefly disrupted the job fair earlier that morning. She wondered what specific issues had brought them to demonstrate at a career event. Were they advocating for better veteran employment opportunities, healthcare funding, or something else entirely? Their message had been lost in the chaos of their removal, but their presence had reminded her that she wasn't the only veteran struggling with the transition to civilian life. Her apartment was in a modest complex that catered to young professionals and offered the kind of anonymity Sarah needed. She had furnished it simply with items purchased at discount stores, creating a space that was functional but deliberately unremarkable. There were no personal photos, military memorabilia, or anything that might raise questions from visitors. Sarah spread the job fair materials across her small dining table and began organizing them into categories. Administrative work in one pile, security positions in another, nonprofit opportunities in a third. Each represented a different path forward, with different risks and benefits. She would need to make decisions soon, as her savings wouldn't last indefinitely. The apartment felt quiet after the chaos of the job fair. Sarah appreciated the silence but also found it unsettling. She had grown accustomed to environments where constant awareness and readiness were necessary for survival. The peaceful suburban setting sometimes felt more foreign to her than combat zones had. She made a simple dinner and sat down to review her notes from the day's conversations. Each interaction had provided information not just about potential employment, but about how successfully she was maintaining her civilian disguise. Tom Bradley's observation that she carried herself like she might have military or law enforcement experience was concerning. She would need to work on suppressing those instinctive behaviors that marked her as someone with specialized training. As evening approached, Sarah realized that the job fair had been both successful and challenging in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had gathered information about viable employment opportunities and made initial contact with several potential employers. But the day had also reminded her how difficult it was going to be to maintain her new identity while building a civilian career. The conversation with Maria about homeless veterans had been particularly affecting. Sarah understood better than she could admit the challenges those veterans faced in transitioning to civilian life. The difference was that most of them were seeking help and support, while she was trying to disappear entirely from the systems designed to assist veterans. She thought about the decorated Army sergeant at the military recruitment booth and wondered about his story. How many deployments had he completed? What had he seen and done in service to his country? How had those experiences shaped him, and how was he processing the transition from active duty to recruitment duty? These were questions she could never ask, just as she could never share her own experiences with the people she had met that day. The isolation was one of the most difficult aspects of her situation. She was surrounded by people, but couldn't truly connect with any of them, because doing so would require revealing parts of herself she needed to keep hidden. Sarah spent the rest of the evening researching the companies she had visited online, reading their websites and employee reviews. She was looking for red flags that might indicate organizations where her background could become problematic, as well as opportunities where she might find genuine satisfaction in civilian work. Helping Hands Community Services had particularly strong reviews from both employees and clients. Former staff members praised the organization's mission and leadership, though several mentioned the emotional challenges of working with traumatized veterans. Current employees described meaningful work that made a real difference in people's lives, but also noted the difficulty of seeing clients struggle with systems that often seemed inadequate to address their needs. SecureMax Security Services had more mixed reviews. Some employees appreciated the variety of assignments and opportunities for advancement, while others complained about inconsistent management and clients who treated security personnel as disposable. Several reviewers mentioned that military veterans seemed to do well with the company, which was both encouraging and concerning for Sarah's purposes. Wilson Financial Services appeared to be a stable, if unremarkable, organization. Reviews suggested predictable work, reasonable benefits, and limited opportunities for advancement. It was exactly the kind of place where someone could blend in and avoid attention, which had its own appeal. As she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on how surreal her day had been. 6 months ago, she had been in a completely different world, dealing with life and death situations on a daily basis. Now she was researching entry-level civilian jobs and worrying about whether her posture gave away her military background. The transition felt both necessary and impossible. She needed to build a new life, but doing so required suppressing everything that had defined her for years. It was like learning to speak a foreign language while pretending she had never heard her native tongue. Tomorrow she would need to follow up on the most promising opportunities from the job fair. She would submit applications, schedule interviews, and continue the careful process of constructing her civilian identity. Each step forward was also a step away from everything she had been, and she wasn't entirely sure that was a journey she was prepared to complete. But for tonight, she was safe, anonymous, and surrounded by the quiet normalcy of civilian life. It would have to be enough. 3 days after the job fair, Sarah's phone rang while she was organizing her small apartment. The caller ID showed Helping Hands Community Services, and she felt her stomach tighten with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. "Sarah Martinez?" came Maria Santos's warm voice through the phone. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "Not at all," Sarah replied, setting down the book she had been reading. "I was hoping to hear from you." "I've been thinking about our conversation at the job fair, and I'd like to offer you a position with our organization. Would you be interested in coming in for a more detailed discussion?" Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with apprehension. The job would provide the income she needed, but it would also place her in daily contact with veterans whose experiences might trigger memories she was trying to suppress. "I'd definitely be interested," she said carefully. "Wonderful. Could you come in tomorrow morning? We have a new client intake session, and I thought it might give you a realistic preview of what the work involves." "That sounds perfect," Sarah agreed, though she wondered if Maria would still think she was perfect for the job if she knew the whole truth about her background. The next morning, Sarah dressed conservatively in slacks and a simple blouse, carrying the same manila folder she had taken to the job fair. Helping Hands Community Services occupied a converted warehouse in an older part of the city, with large windows and a welcoming entrance that contrasted with the industrial nature of the building. Maria met her in the lobby and led her through a tour of the facilities. The organization operated a day center where homeless veterans could access showers, meals, medical care, and various support services. There were also transitional housing units for those ready to take steps toward independent living. "We serve about 200 veterans on any given day," Maria explained as they walked through a large common area where several dozen people were eating breakfast and socializing. "Some are chronically homeless, others are temporarily displaced due to financial crisis or family problems. Our goal is to meet them where they are and help them move forward." Sarah observed the clients with professional interest, noting details that most civilian volunteers would miss. She could identify the older Vietnam veterans by their bearing and the particular way they held themselves. The younger Iraq and Afghanistan veterans were often easier to spot by their military-style haircuts and the way they positioned themselves to maintain sight lines to exits. "What's the most challenging aspect of the work?" Sarah asked as they continued the tour. "Building trust," Maria replied without hesitation. "Many of our clients have been let down by institutions before. Government agencies, healthcare systems, employers, sometimes even family members. They've learned to be self-reliant because depending on others has led to disappointment." They entered a smaller room where a group therapy session was in progress. A counselor was leading a discussion about coping mechanisms for anxiety and depression. Sarah recognized several therapeutic techniques being employed and found herself evaluating the counselor's approach with the trained eye of someone who had received extensive psychological support herself. One of the participants, a young man with visible scarring on his arms and neck, was describing his struggles with crowds and loud noises. "I can't even go to the grocery store without feeling like everyone's watching me," he said. "I know it's not rational, but I can't shake the feeling that something bad is about to happen." The counselor nodded empathetically. "Those feelings are completely normal given what you've experienced. Your brain is trying to protect you by staying alert to potential threats. The challenge is learning to distinguish between actual danger and perceived danger." Sarah found herself relating deeply to the young veteran's description. She experienced similar hypervigilance in civilian settings, though she had learned to manage it well enough to function in public. She wondered if that was obvious to trained observers like Maria. After the tour, Maria led Sarah to her office for a more formal discussion about the position. The office was small but comfortable, with bookshelves full of resources on trauma, addiction, and veteran services. Several awards and certificates hung on the walls, along with photos of Maria with various veterans and community leaders. "The position we're offering is client advocate," Maria explained, pulling out a job description. "You would be assigned a caseload of about 25 clients and help them navigate various services and resources. This includes accompanying them to medical appointments, helping with housing applications, connecting them with job training programs, and providing general support and guidance." Sarah reviewed the job description carefully. The work would require her to interface with numerous government agencies, healthcare providers, and other service organizations. It would also involve building personal relationships with veterans who might ask pointed questions about her own background and experiences. "What kind of training is provided?" Sarah asked. 2 weeks of intensive training on our programs and procedures plus ongoing professional development," Maria replied. "We also require our advocates to participate in monthly supervision sessions where we discuss challenging cases and provide mutual support. And the clients don't mind working with advocates who don't have military experience themselves?" Maria considered the question carefully. "Some prefer working with other veterans, while others actually find it easier to open up to civilians. Veterans sometimes feel like they have to maintain a certain image with other veterans or they worry about being judged for their struggles. Civilians can offer a different perspective and a safe space to be vulnerable." Sarah nodded, though she wondered which category she would fall into. Technically, she would be presenting as a civilian, but her actual understanding of military culture and trauma would inevitably influence her interactions with clients. "When would you need me to start?" Sarah asked. "As soon as possible," Maria replied. "We're short-staffed right now, and we have several new clients who need advocates assigned. Could you start Monday if we complete the paperwork today?" "That works for me," Sarah agreed, though she felt a familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied situations where she couldn't fully control the variables. The next several hours were spent completing employment paperwork, background checks, and basic orientation materials. Sarah had prepared for the background check by establishing a civilian identity that would pass standard employment screening, though she knew more intensive investigations could reveal inconsistencies in her cover story. During the paperwork process, she met several other staff members, including Dr. James Patterson, the organization's clinical psychologist. Dr. Patterson was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had worked with traumatized veterans for over 20 years. "Client advocacy can be emotionally demanding work," Dr. Patterson explained during a brief meeting. "You'll be hearing difficult stories and witnessing people struggle with profound challenges. Do you have experience dealing with trauma, either your own or others?" The question was routine, but loaded for Sarah. She had extensive experience with trauma from multiple perspectives, but admitting that would require explanations she couldn't provide. "I think I'm emotionally resilient," she said carefully, "and I'm willing to learn whatever I need to know to be effective in this role." "Good attitude," Dr. Patterson replied. "We'll cover trauma-informed care principles during your training, and I'm always available for consultation if you encounter situations that feel overwhelming." Sarah's first week of training was both educational and emotionally challenging. She learned about the various programs and services offered by Helping Hands, as well as the complex web of government agencies, nonprofits, and healthcare providers that served the veteran community. The training covered topics like suicide prevention, addiction recovery, housing assistance, and disability benefits. More difficult were the role-playing exercises, where staff members practiced interacting with clients in crisis. Sarah found herself drawing on her real experiences to respond appropriately to scenarios involving PTSD episodes, anxiety attacks, and suicidal ideation. She had to be careful not to display too much expertise or insight that would seem unusual for someone with her claimed background. During one exercise, the trainer presented a scenario where a client was experiencing a panic attack triggered by the sound of a helicopter flying overhead. Most of the other trainees suggested standard calming techniques like deep breathing and grounding exercises. Sarah instinctively wanted to provide more specific guidance based on her understanding of combat-related triggers, but she forced herself to offer only basic responses. "Very good instincts," the trainer commented after the exercise. "You seem to have a natural understanding of how to remain calm in crisis situations." Sarah felt a moment of alarm. "I just try to think about what would help me feel better if I were in that situation," she replied, which was true but incomplete. The training also included sessions on documentation requirements, legal and ethical guidelines, and organizational policies. Sarah learned that advocates were expected to maintain detailed records of their interactions with clients, participate in regular case reviews, and report any concerns about client safety to supervisors. On her first day working directly with clients, Maria paired Sarah with an experienced advocate named Marcus Thompson. Marcus was a former Army medic who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before transitioning to civilian social services work. His military background was obvious from the way he carried himself and the ease with which he connected with veteran clients. "The key is building trust without trying too hard," Marcus explained as they prepared to meet Sarah's first assigned client. "Veterans can usually tell when someone's being genuine versus when they're just doing a job. They've been around enough fake concern from bureaucrats and politicians." Their first appointment was with Robert Chen, a 40-year-old Marine veteran who had been living in transitional housing for 3 months while trying to secure permanent disability benefits. Robert had lost his left leg below the knee in an IED explosion during his second deployment to Iraq and struggled with chronic pain and PTSD. "So you're the new advocate," Robert said when Maria introduced Sarah. His tone was neutral but assessing, the way veterans often evaluated new people in their lives. "What's your background?" Sarah felt the familiar tension of needing to provide enough information to seem credible without revealing too much. "I'm new to this kind of work, but I'm here to help however I can," she said. "What's your biggest concern right now?" "The VA keeps losing my paperwork," Robert replied with obvious frustration. "I've submitted the same medical records 4 times, and they keep saying they need additional documentation. Meanwhile, I'm trying to live on temporary benefits that barely cover rent and food." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "We see this all the time. The system is designed to discourage people from pursuing benefits. Sarah, would you like to review Robert's case file and see what might be missing?" Sarah spent the next hour reviewing Robert's documentation with a level of detail that impressed both Marcus and Robert. Her questions were specific and informed, focusing on aspects of his case that most civilian advocates might overlook. "Have you requested your complete military medical records from the National Personnel Records Center?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes there are documented injuries or treatments that don't make it into the initial VA file." Robert looked surprised. "I didn't know I could do that. How would I go about requesting them?" Sarah began explaining the process, then caught herself when she realized she was demonstrating more knowledge of military bureaucracy than her cover story would explain. I think that's something we could research together," she amended quickly. Marcus gave her a curious look but didn't comment. After the meeting, as they walked back to the office, he brought up her apparent familiarity with military systems. "You seem to know quite a bit about VA procedures for someone who's new to this work," Marcus observed. "Have you worked with veterans before?" "I did some research before starting this job," Sarah replied, which was technically true, though misleading. "I wanted to be as prepared as possible." "That's commendable," Marcus said, "but you might want to be careful not to give advice you're not certain about. The VA system is complicated, and misinformation can really hurt people's cases." Sarah realized she was going to need to be more careful about displaying her knowledge too obviously. The challenge was that her instincts were to provide the most effective help possible to veterans who were struggling with systems she understood intimately. Over the following weeks, Sarah found her rhythm working with clients while carefully managing her public persona. She became known for her thorough preparation and attention to detail, qualities that served her clients well, but also occasionally raised questions about her background. One particularly challenging case involved Maria Gonzalez, a former Army nurse who had served in both Iraq and Afghanistan before being medically retired due to PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Maria struggled with memory problems, emotional regulation, and severe anxiety that made it difficult for her to function in civilian settings. During one of their sessions, Maria broke down while describing her experiences treating wounded soldiers in a field hospital. "You try to save everyone, but you can't," she sobbed. "I watched kids die who were younger than my little brother. How do you live with that?" Sarah found herself deeply affected by Maria's story, recognizing emotions and experiences that resonated with her own unprocessed trauma. She wanted to share her understanding, to let Maria know that she wasn't alone, but doing so would expose her own secret. "It sounds like you carry a lot of guilt about things that were beyond your control," Sarah said carefully, drawing on therapeutic language she had learned during training. "You don't understand," Maria replied with bitter frustration. "Nobody understands unless they've been there. I'm tired of people telling me it wasn't my fault or that I did my best. My best wasn't good enough." Sarah felt the words hit her like physical blows. She had said similar things to counselors and therapists who had tried to help her process her own experiences. The urge to break cover and share her understanding was almost overwhelming. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "I don't understand what you went through. But I can see that you're in pain, and I want to help you find resources that might ease that pain." It was the most honest thing she could say without revealing her own background, and something in her tone seemed to connect with Maria. The veteran looked at her with new attention, as if trying to figure out what was different about this advocate compared to others she had worked with. "Most people just want to fix you or make you feel better," Maria said slowly. "You're not doing that." "Because you can't be fixed," Sarah replied. "You can only be supported while you figure out how to live with your experiences." Maria stared at her for a long moment. "That's exactly right. How did you know that?" Sarah realized she had revealed more insight than she intended, but couldn't take it back. "I guess I just listened carefully," she said. Word of Sarah's effectiveness with difficult cases began to spread through the organization. Maria Santos started assigning her clients who had struggled with other advocates, particularly those dealing with complex trauma or trust issues. Sarah's success rate was impressive, but it came at a personal cost that she couldn't share with anyone. The constant exposure to veteran trauma was reopening wounds she had tried to close. She found herself having nightmares again, struggling with the hypervigilance that had improved during her first months of civilian life. The irony was that helping other veterans process their experiences was making it harder for her to suppress her own. During her third month on the job, Sarah was assigned to work with David Park, a former Marine sniper who had completed 4 tours in Afghanistan. David was suspicious of all authority figures and had cycled through 3 previous advocates without making meaningful progress on his housing and benefits applications. "Let me guess," David said when Sarah introduced herself. "You're going to help me get my life together and become a productive member of society." "I'm going to help you navigate some bureaucratic processes," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Whether you get your life together is up to you." David seemed surprised by her directness. Most advocates approached him with excessive sympathy or optimism that he found patronizing. "At least you're honest about it. What makes you think you'll succeed where the others failed?" "Maybe I won't," Sarah said, "but I'm willing to try if you are." Over the following weeks, Sarah and David developed an unusual working relationship. He tested her constantly, making crude comments, missing appointments, and generally behaving in ways designed to provoke a reaction. Sarah's response was consistently calm and professional, neither taking the bait nor backing down from challenges. "You don't get rattled easily," David observed after a particularly difficult session where he had described some of his combat experiences in graphic detail, clearly trying to shock her. "Not much," Sarah agreed. "Most civilians get uncomfortable when veterans talk about the real stuff," David continued, studying her reaction. "They want to hear about brotherhood and heroism, not about the time you had to scrape your buddy's brain off your rifle scope." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though internally she was reliving similar memories. "I'm here to help you with whatever you need to deal with," she said. "I'm not here to judge your experiences." "You talk like you've seen some shit yourself," David said directly. "What's your story?" It was the question Sarah had been dreading, posed by someone with the skills to detect deception. She had learned during training that many veterans could sense when someone was hiding something, particularly other veterans. "Everyone has their own struggles," Sarah said carefully. "Mine aren't relevant to helping you with yours." David leaned back in his chair, clearly not satisfied with her non-answer, but apparently willing to let it go for the moment. "Fair enough. But just so you know, I can tell when people are feeding me bullshit. Whatever you're not telling me, I hope it doesn't get in the way of you doing your job." "It won't," Sarah promised, though she wasn't entirely certain that was true. As summer turned to fall, Sarah had established herself as one of Helping Hand's most effective advocates. Her clients made measurable progress on their goals, and other staff members frequently sought her advice on difficult cases. But the success came with increasing pressure to maintain her cover story while dealing with escalating personal triggers. The breaking point came during a staff training session on veteran suicide prevention. Dr. Patterson was leading a discussion about warning signs and intervention strategies when he presented a case study that hit uncomfortably close to home for Sarah. The client was a decorated combat veteran who had received multiple Purple Hearts, Dr. Patterson explained. She had successfully hidden her struggles for months, appearing to function well in civilian life. Her co-workers and friends had no idea she was planning to take her own life. Sarah felt the room begin to spin as Dr. Patterson continued describing the case. The details were different from her own situation, but the underlying themes were painfully familiar. A veteran struggling with invisible wounds, maintaining a facade of normalcy while battling internal demons, feeling isolated by secrets that couldn't be shared. "The tragedy is that she had access to help," Dr. Patterson continued, "but she couldn't bring herself to seek it because she was afraid of revealing vulnerabilities that might compromise her civilian life." Sarah excused herself from the training session, claiming sudden illness. She made it to the bathroom before the panic attack hit in full force. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, her vision narrowed, and she felt like she was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around her as memories of combat, casualties, and loss flooded her consciousness. She spent 20 minutes in the bathroom stall, using breathing techniques and grounding exercises to regain control. When she finally emerged, Maria was waiting for her in the hallway. "Are you all right?" Maria asked with genuine concern. "You looked pale during the training." "Just feeling a bit under the weather," Sarah replied, though she knew her cover was weak. "The suicide prevention training can be emotionally difficult," Maria said gently. "It brings up a lot of heavy material. If you need to talk about anything, my door is always open." Sarah nodded gratefully, but knew she couldn't take advantage of Maria's offer without revealing more than she was prepared to share. The conversation reminded her how isolated she had become, surrounded by people who cared about her but couldn't truly know her. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at a small wooden box she kept hidden in her bedroom closet. Inside were the military medals and awards she had earned during her years of service, including 5 Purple Hearts representing injuries sustained during multiple deployments. She hadn't looked at them since moving to Phoenix, but the day's events had triggered memories she couldn't suppress. She opened the box carefully, revealing the distinctive purple ribbon and gold heart-shaped medal that honored those wounded in service to their country. Each one represented a specific incident, a moment when her dedication to her mission and her fellow soldiers had resulted in physical harm. Taken together, they told a story of courage, sacrifice, and survival that few people would ever fully understand. But they also represented a past she was trying to leave behind, an identity she was attempting to shed in favor of anonymous civilian life. The contradiction was becoming unsustainable. She couldn't continue helping other veterans process their military experiences while denying her own, and she couldn't maintain relationships built on deception indefinitely. Sarah carefully returned the medals to their box and closed the lid. Tomorrow, she would return to work and continue the careful balancing act that had become her daily routine. But she was beginning to understand that the life she was trying to build was constructed on a foundation that wouldn't hold indefinitely. The question was whether she would find a way to bridge her past and present identities before the stress of maintaining 2 separate lives became too much to bear. The veterans she worked with had taught her that healing required honesty, but honesty required courage she wasn't sure she possessed. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a mental note to be more careful during future training sessions. She couldn't afford another public episode that might raise questions about her background. But she also couldn't ignore the growing realization that hiding her true self was becoming as damaging as the trauma she was trying to escape. The work at Helping Hands was meaningful and fulfilling in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt like she was making a genuine difference in people's lives. But the success was tinged with the constant anxiety of maintaining her deception and the growing emotional toll of suppressing her own need for healing and connection. Something would have to give soon, but Sarah wasn't ready to face the consequences of revealing her true identity. For now, she would continue the careful dance of helping other veterans while hiding the very experiences that made her uniquely qualified to understand their struggles. The irony wasn't lost on her, but the alternatives seemed even more frightening than the status quo. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in November when Sarah arrived at work to find the staff in emergency mode. Marcus Thompson met her at the entrance with an expression of barely controlled panic. "We need all hands on deck," he said urgently. "Tommy Rodriguez barricaded himself in the transitional housing unit last night. He's been drinking heavily and making threats about ending it all. SWAT is staging outside, but they're willing to let us try talking to him first." Sarah's blood ran cold. Tommy was a 24-year-old Army veteran who had survived 3 IED explosions during his deployment to Afghanistan. He had been making progress in the program, slowly building trust, and working through his trauma with Dr. Patterson. But the anniversary of his best friend's death was approaching, and Sarah had noticed warning signs in their recent sessions. "Where's Dr. Patterson?" Sarah asked as they hurried toward the transitional housing building. "He's out of town at a conference," Marcus replied. "Won't be back until Thursday. Maria is trying to coordinate with the police, but they're getting impatient. If we can't get Tommy to come out voluntarily soon, they're going to force entry." Sarah felt her military training instinctively kick in as she assessed the situation. The transitional housing unit was a converted apartment complex with limited access points and multiple potential complications. If law enforcement forced entry on someone experiencing a PTSD crisis, the results could be catastrophic. "What exactly did he say?" Sarah asked. "He called the night supervisor around 2 a.m. completely intoxicated, saying he couldn't do it anymore. He mentioned his friend Jake, who died in the blast that gave Tommy his traumatic brain injury, said he should have died too and that he was tired of pretending to be okay." As they approached the building, Sarah could see the tactical vehicles and uniformed officers positioned around the perimeter. The sight triggered memories of military operations, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate crisis. This wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This was Phoenix, and Tommy was a veteran in crisis, not an enemy combatant. Maria Santos was standing near the command vehicle, speaking intensely with a police sergeant. When she saw Sarah and Marcus approaching, she waved them over with obvious relief. "Thank God you're here," Maria said. "The police negotiator is tied up with another situation across town. They're willing to give us 30 minutes to try to establish communication, but after that, they're going in." "Has anyone tried talking to him yet?" Sarah asked. "Marcus tried through the door about an hour ago," Maria replied. Tommy responded but wasn't coherent. He kept talking about explosions and saying he could hear Jake calling for help. Sarah recognized the symptoms immediately. Tommy wasn't just dealing with suicidal ideation. He was experiencing a severe PTSD episode with possible hallucinations related to his traumatic brain injury. The combination of alcohol, trauma anniversary, and isolation had created a perfect storm of psychological crisis. "I need to talk to him," Sarah said with quiet authority that surprised both Maria and Marcus. "Sarah, you've only been working with Tommy for a few weeks," Maria cautioned. "This requires someone with extensive crisis intervention experience." "Trust me," Sarah replied, though she couldn't explain why they should. "I know how to handle this." Maria hesitated, clearly uncertain about sending a relatively new employee into such a volatile situation. But with limited options and time running out, she finally nodded her consent. "Okay, but you stay in radio contact at all times. If the situation escalates or you feel unsafe, you get out immediately." Sarah approached the apartment building with the measured confidence of someone who had navigated much more dangerous situations. The police had established a perimeter but cleared the immediate area around Tommy's unit. Sarah could see that the windows were covered with blankets and furniture was pushed against the door. "Tommy," she called out clearly but not aggressively. "It's Sarah Martinez from Helping Hands. I'm here to talk." There was no immediate response, but Sarah could hear movement inside the apartment. She settled into a position near the door where she could speak clearly, but take cover if necessary, falling back on tactical positioning she had learned in combat zones. "Tommy, I know you're hurting," Sarah continued. "I know the anniversary is coming up, and I know you've been thinking about Jake a lot lately." "Go away," came a slurred voice from inside. "You don't know shit about anything." "You're right," Sarah replied honestly. "I don't know exactly what you went through, but I know what it's like to lose people who mattered to you. I know what it's like to survive when others didn't." "Bullshit," Tommy responded, but Sarah could hear that his attention was focused on her voice. "You're just another social worker who read some books about PTSD." Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't save Tommy's life while maintaining the lies that had defined her civilian existence. Some things mattered more than protecting her cover. "I'm not just a social worker, Tommy," Sarah said clearly. "I'm a veteran. 5 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. I know about IED explosions because I've been in more than I can count. I know about losing friends because I've held dying soldiers in my arms." The silence from inside the apartment stretched for nearly a minute. Behind her, Sarah could sense the surprise from Maria and Marcus, who were monitoring the conversation from a safe distance. "You're lying," Tommy finally said, but his voice had changed. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with curiosity and hope. "I'm not lying," Sarah replied. "I've been lying about almost everything else since I moved to Phoenix, but I'm not lying about this. I know exactly what you're feeling right now because I've felt it too." "Prove it," Tommy challenged. Sarah looked back toward Maria, who was staring at her with obvious shock and confusion. There was no going back now. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I'm coming to my car to get something," Sarah called to Tommy. "Don't do anything until I get back." She walked quickly to her Honda Civic, aware that every police officer and Helping Hands staff member was watching her with intense curiosity. She opened the trunk and retrieved a small duffel bag she had hoped never to need again. Inside was the wooden box containing her military awards. When she returned to Tommy's door, Sarah sat down on the concrete walkway and opened the box. The Purple Hearts gleamed against their purple ribbons. Along with her combat action badge, bronze star, and other decorations that told the story of years spent in active combat. "Tommy, I'm putting something on the ground by your door," Sarah said. "When you're ready, I want you to look at it." She carefully arranged the 5 purple hearts in a line on the concrete, then stepped back. Each medal represented a different injury, a different moment when she had been wounded while serving her country. Together, they told a story of sacrifice and survival that few people could match. The apartment door opened slowly, and Tommy appeared in the doorway. He was disheveled and obviously intoxicated, but his eyes immediately focused on the medals at his feet. Sarah could see the recognition dawn on his face as he processed what he was seeing. "Holy shit," Tommy whispered, kneeling down to examine the Purple Hearts more closely. 5 Purple Hearts. What the hell happened to you?" "IEDs, sniper fire, mortar attacks," Sarah replied simply. "Same kinds of things that happened to you, just more times. The last one put me in a coma for 3 weeks. That's when I decided maybe I had pushed my luck far enough." Tommy looked up at her with new understanding. "You really are a veteran." "Army, 11 years active duty," Sarah confirmed. "Medically retired after my 5th injury. Been struggling to figure out civilian life ever since." "Then why are you working at a nonprofit?" Tommy asked, confusion mixing with his emotional distress. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Sarah sat down on the walkway across from Tommy. Noting that he had unconsciously moved away from the apartment entrance and was now in open space where he was less of a threat to himself. "Because I was trying to hide from everything that happened," Sarah said honestly. "I thought if I could pretend to be a normal civilian, maybe I could forget about the war and move on with my life." "Did it work?" "No," Sarah laughed bitterly. "Turns out you can't run away from yourself, and working with veterans every day while pretending I never served was slowly driving me crazy." Tommy picked up one of the Purple Hearts and examined it closely. "This is real. This is actually real." "Very real," Sarah confirmed. "Just like the pain you're feeling right now. Just like the guilt about surviving when Jake didn't." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "He was my best friend since basic training. We were supposed to go home together, start a business together. The blast that killed him just gave me a headache and some hearing loss. How is that fair?" "It's not fair," Sarah replied. "Nothing about war is fair. Good people die and damaged people survive. There's no logic to it, no cosmic justice. It just is." "So, how do you live with it?" Tommy asked desperately. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer honestly. "Some days I don't know," she finally said. "Some days I wake up, and the first thing I think about is all the people who didn't make it home. But then I think about the fact that I did make it home. And maybe that means I have a responsibility to do something meaningful with the life I still have. Like working with other veterans? Like helping people who are struggling with the same things I struggle with," Sarah clarified. Turns out I'm pretty good at it, probably because I actually understand what you're going through. Tommy was quiet for several minutes, turning the Purple Heart over in his hands. Sarah could see the crisis beginning to de-escalate as his focus shifted from internal pain to external connection. The immediate danger of suicide was passing, though she knew the underlying issues would require ongoing work. "Will you help me get into rehab?" Tommy asked finally. "Real rehab, not just outpatient counseling. I can't keep living like this." "Yes," Sarah replied without hesitation. "But first we need to get you sobered up and make sure you're medically stable. Can you come with me to the hospital?" Tommy nodded, standing up slowly and stepping away from his apartment. "Can I keep this?" he asked, holding up the Purple Heart. "No, but you can look at all of them anytime you want," Sarah said, beginning to collect the medals. "They'll remind you that survival is possible, even after the worst experiences imaginable." As Sarah and Tommy walked toward the waiting paramedics, she became aware of the crowd of police officers, firefighters, and helping hand staff who had witnessed the entire exchange. Maria Santos was staring at her with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "We need to talk," Maria said quietly as the paramedics began evaluating Tommy. "I know," Sarah replied, securing the metal box in her duffel bag. "I have a lot of explaining to do." The next several hours were a blur of hospital visits, police reports, and crisis debriefing sessions. Tommy was admitted to the psychiatric unit for evaluation and detox, but his condition was stable, and his suicidal ideation had significantly decreased. Dr. Patterson, who had flown back early from his conference, declared the intervention a complete success. But Sarah's revelation had created new complications. Her employment file contained false information about her background, and her deception raised questions about her qualifications and trustworthiness. Maria had convened an emergency meeting with the organization's board of directors to determine how to proceed. "I need to understand why you lied on your employment application," Maria said, as they sat in her office late that afternoon. "You clearly have extensive knowledge and experience that would have made you an ideal candidate. Why hide it?" Sarah had spent hours preparing for this conversation, but it was still difficult to explain her motivations. "I was trying to escape my military identity," she said carefully. "I thought if I could become a civilian completely, I might be able to heal from my own trauma." "But you were already helping veterans," Maria pointed out. "You were already using your experience in positive ways." "Not intentionally," Sarah replied. "I applied for this job because I needed income, not because I wanted to work with veterans. But once I started, I realized how much I understood about their experiences." Dr. Patterson leaned forward in his chair. "Sarah, I've reviewed your work over the past few months, and your success rate with difficult cases is remarkable. Now I understand why. You weren't just applying textbook knowledge. You were drawing on lived experience. Which makes me wonder about your own trauma history," Maria added gently. "Have you received treatment for your combat-related injuries?" Sarah felt exposed and vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. "Some," she admitted. "But I stopped going to therapy when I moved to Phoenix. I thought I could handle things on my own." 5 Purple Hearts suggests extensive trauma, Dr. Patterson observed clinically. That level of repeated injury and exposure to combat stress would require ongoing psychological support for most people. "I'm not most people," Sarah replied defensively. "No, you're not," Dr. Patterson agreed. "You're someone who survived extraordinary circumstances and developed remarkable resilience. But resilience doesn't mean you don't need help processing your experiences." The conversation continued for over an hour, covering Sarah's military service, her transition challenges, and her decision to hide her background. By the end, Maria had made a decision that surprised everyone. "I'm not going to terminate your employment," Maria announced. "What you did today saved Tommy's life. Your deception was wrong, but your effectiveness with our clients is undeniable. However, Dr. Patterson added, we need to make some changes going forward. First, we'll need to update your personnel file with accurate information about your background. Second, you'll need to participate in ongoing therapy to address your own trauma. And third, we should consider how to best utilize your military experience in your role. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What does that mean practically? It means we'd like to offer you a promotion to senior client advocate with a focus on veterans dealing with complex trauma, Maria explained. You'd work with our most challenging cases and help train other staff on military culture and combat-related PTSD. But you'd also be required to be honest about your background with clients, Dr. Patterson added. No more deception, no more hiding who you are. Sarah thought about Tommy's reaction when he realized she was a fellow veteran. The connection had been immediate and powerful, built on shared understanding that couldn't be replicated through training or education alone. Would other staff members know about my background? Sarah asked. Only those who need to know for professional purposes, Maria assured her. But yes, your veteran status would become part of your professional identity here. It was exactly what Sarah had been afraid of since moving to Phoenix, but also exactly what had saved Tommy's life that morning. She couldn't continue helping veterans while hiding her own experiences, and she couldn't heal from her trauma while refusing to acknowledge it. I'll need some time to think about it, Sarah said finally. Of course, Maria replied. Take the rest of the week. But Sarah, I want you to know that what you revealed today doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you powerful. Your experiences are an asset, not a liability. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with the box of medals open on her coffee table. For months, she had hidden them away, symbols of a life she was trying to forget. But now they seemed like something different, evidence of survival, resilience, and the capacity to find meaning in suffering. She thought about Tommy's question. How do you live with survivor's guilt? The answer, she was beginning to understand, wasn't to hide from it or pretend it didn't exist. The answer was to use the survival for something meaningful, to honor the memory of those who didn't make it home by helping those who did. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Tommy's number. Sarah, came his voice, clearer and more sober than she had heard in weeks. Hi, Tommy. How are you feeling? Better, he replied. I wanted to thank you for today, and I wanted you to know that I told the doctor about our conversation, about what you shared with me. How did that go? Sarah asked. He said it was the first time he'd seen me connect with anyone since I've been in the program. He thinks having a veteran advocate who actually understands combat trauma might be exactly what I need. Sarah smiled, feeling something shift in her chest. I'm glad to hear that. Are you going to keep working at Helping Hands? Tommy asked. I think so, Sarah replied, looking at the purple hearts glinting in the lamplight. I think it might be time for me to stop running from who I am. Good, Tommy said, because there are a lot of us who could use someone who actually gets it. After hanging up, Sarah carefully placed the medals back in their box, but this time she put the box on the bookshelf in her living room where she could see it. They were no longer symbols of a past she wanted to forget, but reminders of experiences that had shaped her into someone uniquely qualified to help others. The next morning, Sarah called Maria and accepted the promotion to senior client advocate. It would mean acknowledging her military background professionally and personally, abandoning the civilian identity she had tried to construct. But it would also mean using her experiences in service of something meaningful, turning survival into purpose. Over the following months, Sarah's work at Helping Hands became a model for veteran-to-veteran advocacy. Her approach was direct, honest, and informed by lived experience that couldn't be replicated through training. Veterans who had struggled with other advocates found success working with someone who truly understood their challenges. The transition wasn't without difficulties. Sarah had to confront her own trauma while helping others process theirs, requiring ongoing therapy and support. Some days were harder than others, particularly when working with clients whose experiences triggered her own memories. But she also discovered something unexpected. Sharing her story and using her experiences to help others became part of her own healing process. The isolation that had characterized her first months in Phoenix gradually gave way to meaningful connections with clients, colleagues, and friends who knew and accepted her full identity. Tommy completed his rehabilitation program and eventually became a peer counselor at Helping Hands, working alongside Sarah to support other veterans in crisis. Their partnership became legendary within the organization. Proof that shared experience and genuine understanding could create powerful therapeutic relationships. Maria Santos often reflected on the day Sarah revealed her true identity by placing 5 purple hearts on the concrete outside Tommy's apartment. In a single moment, Sarah had transformed from a mysterious newcomer with hidden depths into a decorated combat veteran whose experiences made her invaluable to their mission. "I learned something important that day," Maria later told new staff members during orientation. "Sometimes the people who seem least qualified for a job turn out to be exactly what you need. And sometimes the courage to be vulnerable and honest is the most professional thing you can do." Dr. Patterson incorporated Sarah's story into his training materials as an example of how hidden trauma could manifest in unexpected ways, and how healing often required the courage to acknowledge painful truths. Her case became a reminder that veterans came in all forms, and that assumptions about who belonged in veteran services could limit the effectiveness of care. Sarah kept the 5 purple hearts in a display case in her office, visible to every client who came to see her. They served as both conversation starters and symbols of hope. Tangible proof that survival was possible even after the most devastating experiences. The medals told a story of service, sacrifice, and survival, but they also represented something more. The possibility of transformation, the power of shared experience, and the importance of using one's pain in service of others' healing. They were no longer symbols of a past Sarah wanted to escape, but badges of honor that qualified her for the most important work of her life. Years later, when people asked Sarah about her decision to reveal her military background, she always returned to that November morning when Tommy Rodriguez was in crisis. "I realized that some things are more important than protecting yourself," she would explain. "Sometimes saving someone else's life requires risking your own secrets." The 5 purple hearts had become more than military decorations. They were symbols of the courage required to live authentically and the healing that becomes possible when we stop hiding from our own experiences. They reminded everyone who saw them that wounds could become sources of strength, and that survival carried with it the responsibility to help others find their way home.